Okay. So at the very beginning, before we watch the documentary টা একদম লাস্টে দেখবো, তার আগে আমরা একটু revision and let us read that essay together first. So we were here, we were in the last class, we were actually here. We read about the colonial discourse analysis of Kim. We read about how the colonizers were represented. Just moment, doesn't seem to be working. Yes. So we read about how the colonizers are represented in the text. We worked through a few quotations within the text. We tried to analyze the language, how it was represented, how Kim was made to speak. We learned about we had already learned about the concept of representation and circulation, and echono people are joining. Okay, we had already learned about the concepts of circulation, representation. আমরা বিভিন্ন রকমের dialogues একসাথে পড়লাম, and that brought us to, as I had said before, that we will be learning about how the natives are represented in Kim as well. Let me just stop my video. Yes. So let us just read about this first, and then we will move on to the documentary. Of course তোমরা বুঝে গেছো যে আমরা আমার পরে তোমার কারোর ক্লাস আছে তোমাদের সাথে একটা থেকে? Do you have a class?
We have, but
from 1. Okay.
We have a break of 30 minutes.
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, তো আমি 10 মিনিট পরে শুরু করেছি, মানে প্লিজ মানে খুব র্যাশনালি আমি 10 মিনিট এক্সট্রা নিয়ে নেবো আর কি। তো ঠিক আছে, তোমরা ডকুমেন্টারিটা দেখতে দেখতে লাঞ্চটা করে নেবে, অসুবিধা নেই। তো yes, so let's learn about this first. So the imperial writers, তো এখন তোমরা already you know about some concepts, some words. So whenever I talk about representation, whenever I use the word representation, the word circulation, please try to associate it with the theoretical moorings which I have taught you. মানে লিটারারি থিওরিটিক্যালি ভাবতে গেলে এটা কিরকম ভাবে হবে সেটা মনে রাখার চেষ্টা করবে, অ্যাসোসিয়েট করতে চেষ্টা করবে, ঠিক আছে? টেক এভরি ক্লাস অ্যাজ আ স্টেপ টুয়ার্ডস কমপ্লিটিং দি অ্যাসাইনমেন্ট। কোনো আলাদা আলাদা কোনো স্টেপস না, দিস ইজ আ স্টেয়ার কেস, যেটা আর কি একটার পর একটাই তোমাকে উঠতে হবে। সো ইট ডাজ নট মিন দ্যাট ইউ টেক does not mean that the next step you take, it means that you forget the last step that you had taken. সবকটাই মনে রাখতে হবে। আর whenever I use phrases which I have already taught you about, I expect that you are understanding what I am trying to convey. So let's begin. Imperial writers, they tend to, as we have already seen, they tend to represent natives in a way that maintains them or keeps them under the control of the colonizer. The colonizer, they created subversion. Subversionটা কি আমি সেটা বলবো। They created subversion in order to maintain the colonizer's status, his status of power over the colonized. Now this subversion that I'm talking about is a concept that was claimed by a person called, আমি এটাই স্লাইডে লিখতে ভুলে গেছি, I'm writing it in the chat box, person called, I'm writing it in small letters, please understand this is a proper noun, Stephen Greenblatt. So this subversion as a concept, as a theoretical concept rather, it was used or claimed by Stephen Greenblatt in his essay called The Invisible Bullets. The essay was also called The Invisible Bullets. So what is this? It's very interesting. Invisible bullets টা কি আবার? এটা মানে এই এসেটা, the first time that I read it, it was completely new and novel idea that was presented to me, and particularly because this strain of thought, of which Greenblatt is one of the primary propounders, this line of thought that is known as new historicism, it is relevantly new. এটা খুব late 20th century তে it was used, or it was developed. And being a modern theory, being a completely modernized literary approach, it analyzed texts as old as the 17th century Elizabethan texts, as 16th century Renaissance texts. So being a modern or modernized literary approach, it took for its analysis texts by Shakespeare, texts by Machiavelli, texts, biblical allusion, texts of allusions, etc., etc. And খুব এই মডার্ন থিওরিগুলোই আর কি ওই পুরোনো টেক্সটে অ্যাপ্লাই করছিল, this theory of new historicism, which is nothing but a branch out of post-colonialism, as we will learn. So, as I was saying, subversion, as claimed by Greenblatt, is the very product of power and furthers its ends. Product of power, but also helps to perpetuate itself. It is an aid to power, subversion. Since why so? How does it further its ends? Since from the other side, I know you should be understanding the concept of other by now. Since from the other side, the natives used subversion in order to regain their freedom. We will see how this happens. To regain their freedom, imperial authors unconsciously or consciously ignore or contain the natives' subversion. এই যে containment কথাটাও তোমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছ স্ক্রিনে। Conscious imperial authors consciously or unconsciously ignore or contain মানে বুঝতে পারছো, contain the natives' subversion, and they focus on orientalizing them or otherizing them. This is a process that Greenblatt calls containment. Then imperial writers or imperial works are invisible bullets used by their authors to propagate Orientalist ideologies. The sentence that you see in front of you, imperial works are invisible bullets used by their authors to propagate Orientalist ideologies. So if you are writing in your answer about invisible bullets, Rudyard Kipling's Kim is an invisible bullet that is used by Kipling, was used by Kipling, or collectively by the imperial race, the race of the white European imperial officers or colonizers. It was used, this text was used as an invisible bullet to perpetuate, to continue its, but their own domination of us, of the Indians. Kim is a text that propagates, it is a propaganda. Propaganda কথাটার মানে দেখবে বাড়িতে গিয়ে, propaganda is a very important word. Okay, if there is a song called A System of a Down এর Hypnotize বলে একটা গান আছে, যেখানে they talk about propaganda, they sing about a real historical event, and they talk about how propaganda is used by power. It's a hard rock song. If you want to listen to it, you can. Propaganda মানেটা জানবে, ঠিক আছে, এটা তোমাদের কাজ করা। So Kim as a text then is an invisible bullet used by Kipling, who is a representative of the white imperial British officer, used by them to propagate or continue orientalization of the natives, or to propagate Orientalist ideologies. এটা কিরকম ভাবে হয়? For this we will take a quick detour, we will take a very fast and swift detour, or digress rather, to this essay by Greenblatt, which is also called Invisible Bullets. কেন? এটা বুঝতে পারবে because he very interestingly presents some facts খুব বলছে না new historicism the historicism যেখানেই আসছে you will take it for granted that there is history in concern over here. Of course literature is not without history and vice versa, উল্টোটাও সত্যি, history is not without literature. It's not that they are separate from each other, they are superimposed to each other. History is superimposed over literature and also the other way around. So I'm going to read certain extracts from the essay and you will be seeing it on your screen as well, and I will be sharing the full text in the classroom, and I would suggest you that you go through it. Just one moment, I will share that part now. হ্যাঁ আমি এখনো দেখাইনি, I haven't shown it yet, just give me one moment. Just give me a second. Got it. Yes, I hope you can see now. So the essay's name is not Three, its name is Invisible Bullets, and it was Invisible Bullets, Renaissance Authority and Subversion by Stephen Greenblatt. 1900s এর সময়, late 1900s এ লেখা. So we will only read the portions that I have already highlighted for your purpose, and we will not, of course, we will not read the entire essay, but only those portions which will reinforce very clearly, make it even more clear, make this theory of post-colonialism even more clear, and how Kipling represents and what is the purpose of those representations. After we have finished with this essay, it will be very, very clear to you all, and that is why, that is the purpose of reading this essay. কেউ দেখতে না পেলে বলবে, ঠিক আছে?
ম্যাম একটু জুম করবেন।
করেছি, এবার দেখা যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম।
ওকে, পুরোটা দেখার দরকার নেই, খালি যেটা হাইলাইটেড আছে সেটাই দেখো। ওকে, সো গ্রিনব্লাট begins his essay very beautifully আর খুব সিম্পলি একটা গল্প দিয়ে, হিস্টোরিক্যাল একটা ঐতিহাসিক একটা গল্প দিয়ে শুরু করে। ঐতিহাসিক গল্প না, আই এম নট trying to say that it's of historical importance, but he talks about an event which happened in the Renaissance, and he begins his essay with that story. So he says that out of his theory of origins, there was this, he begins his story with of a person called Menocchio. এই যে Menocchio দেখবে এখানে লেখা আছে Menocchio. So Menocchio was giving he was telling something, he was telling a few things, he was speaking about a few things to everyone else. Now what was it? He was giving the theory of origins. Theory of origins মানে we all know that we have the first theory of origins as presented to us was in the Bible, the part of it called the Genesis, which is the theory of origins of the human race, of the human world, and how it came to be and what it came to become. So Menocchio was also providing a theory of origins, and out of this theory of origins, which is of course in its underlying materialism far closer to our construction of reality than creation ex nihilo, Menocchio proceeded to the conclusion that doctrinal distinctions even between Islam and Christianity, let alone between Catholicism and heresy, were finally meaningless, and that religious persecution was pernicious. Do not be confused by the language. খুব সিম্পল জিনিস বোঝাচ্ছে। Menocchio is telling a story according to which he comes to the conclusion that Christianity and Islam, there is no distinction between them. There is no distinction between Catholicism and heresy. He was speaking something very, very dangerous, as you can understand, because in the Renaissance the church was the supreme authority. He was a Christian, Greenblatt says. He was a Christian because he was born a Christian. He had no desire to change, but neither did he wish to convert anyone else. Moreover, he declared to his incredulous and increasingly alarmed auditors, he believed that most of the sacraments were worthless. So you can understand যে ও কতটা ডেঞ্জারাস কথাবার্তা ওকে বলছে যে most of the sacraments, as in even the Bible and its scripts thereof, they're all worthless, or more accurately, that they were. Now here is when he becomes the most dangerous. He says, more accurately, they were cunning devices designed by Pope and priests to extract money from the poor. He had shared these views in the mill, the tavern, and the streets, and his fellow villagers, and would, he said, be happy to share them with the Holy Father himself. So I am not going into details, but be clever enough to understand what he is doing. He is actually circulating his own ideas of how religion is represented. Not being in power, that is the problem, that he is a common man and he is not in power, and he is creating his own ideas and not only circulating them, but also saying that there is no difference between Christianity and heresy, no difference between Islam and Christianity, that all sacraments are worthless. So what happens to him? কি মনে হয় ওর সাথে কি হতে চলেছে? Let's see. কেউ না দেখতে পেলে আবার বলবে, ঠিক আছে? Okay. Menocchio was burned at the stake as a relapsed heretic. Heretic মানে যে rumors ছড়ায়। এবার rumors কি? That is anything that goes against the policy of the church. You are a heretic if you say anything against religion, and you will be burned at the stake if you were born in the Renaissance. So Menocchio was burned at the stake and as a relapsed heretic. And Greenblatt says that this is the radical subversiveness. হ্যাঁ, ওপরে আর কিছু নেই, মানে এইটাই আছে আর কি। হ্যাঁ 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 হ্যাঁ, এইটা নাকি এই আগেরটা বলছো? লিখতে হবে না, লিখছো নাকি তোমরা? এইটা আমি পাঠিয়ে দেবো, পরে দেখে নেবে। এইগুলো লিখতে হবে না, আমি এই টেক্সটটা পাঠিয়ে দেবো, হাইলাইটেড টেক্সটটাই পাঠিয়ে দেবো, সো নো ইস্যুস। ওকে ওকে, সো yes, I missed the first highlighting. ওখানে বলছে he was expressly forbidden to discuss his former ideas. Menocchio did not listen, and he was burnt at the stake. This is what Greenblatt calls radical subversiveness, which is an attempt to seize existing authority. That Menocchio does. He seizes the existing authority of the Christian church and challenges the principles upon which its authority was based. Now, আজকের দিনে as students you must know what were these principles that Menocchio was challenging. Catholicism as an institution কি করতো নিজের পাওয়ারটাকে বাঁচিয়ে রাখার জন্য, what means it used to adopt in order to perpetuate its own control. And Greenblatt also says that this kind of a behavior, this subversiveness that Menocchio shows, it is a form of restraint. It is a form of restraint from his own perspective. Now, আমি এই এসেটা খুব বেশি ডিটেইলে বোঝাবো না, ঠিক আছে? আমি যতটা সিম্পলিস্টিকলি বোঝানো যায় আমি বোঝাচ্ছি, সো আই এম মুভিং অন। যতটুকু বোঝাচ্ছি তার মধ্যে যদি কিছু রিপিট করতে হয়, ইফ ইউ ওয়ান্ট মি টু রিপিট মাই সেলফ, প্লিজ স্টপ মি অ্যান্ড টেল মি টু রিপিট, ওকে? নট বিয়ন্ড দ্যাট। বাকি জিনিসগুলো পড়ে জিজ্ঞেস করবে না, জাস্ট দি হাইলাইটেড পোর্শনস, ওকে? Greenblatt then says that elements that can be understood to be subversive either by ourselves or by a reader who lived surrounded by the institutional expressions of that ideology. And this is why, even though Greenblatt applies his theory to Renaissance texts, it is still applicable today, because he defines, bolche je can be understood to be subversive either by ourselves or by any reader who lives surrounded by the institutional expressions of that ideology. So if we are surrounded by the institutional expressions of the ideology of capitalism and patriarchy, then there are many elements that we can ourselves find to be subversive. আমরা নিজেই subversive হতে পারি। আমি প্যান্টালুন্স আর শপার স্টপ থেকে আজকে জামা না কিনে একটা খাদির দোকানে যাব কিনবো। আমি বিশ্ব বাংলার কথা বলছি না, ওরা তো আরো বেশি টাকা চার্জ করে। ওরা তো সব থেকে বেশি পুঁজিবাদী, কটেজ ইন্ডাস্ট্রি বেসড হয়েও একটা নর্মাল খাদির দোকানে গিয়ে জামা কাপড় কিনবো। দ্যাট ইজ হাউ আই এম সাবভার্সিভ, দ্যাট আই এম নট পেইং ব্যাক টু ক্যাপিটালিজম the money that I'm earning for them, from them. I'm not paying them back. এটা খুবই কি বলবো, এফেক্টলেস সাবভার্সন তুমি বলতে পারো, বাট ইন দিস মডার্ন ওয়ার্ল্ড this is all that I can do. And what Menocchio did, for that he was burnt alive. So this is the subversion that we will look for also, that we are looking for also in Kim. Moving on. See, I have skipped a lot of portions. এখানে অনেকটা portions আমরা পড়বো একসাথে। I hope all of you can see. Okay. আমাকে না একটা বাজলে কেউ বলবে তো, একটু প্রম্পট করবে তো, আমি জাস্ট I will lose any sense of time. Okay. So we have then, Greenblatt says, as in Machiavelli, you know about Machiavelli, naam at least শুনেছো, his Prince, he has written the Prince, Machiavellian cunning concept or লেখা থেকেই আসে। We have then, as in Machiavelli, now Greenblatt analyzes another text, that is texts of Machiavelli. As in Machiavelli, a sense of religion as a set of beliefs manipulated by the subtlety of the priests to help ensure social order and cohesion. You know this, এখানে নতুন করে বোঝানোর কিছু নেই কি করে প্রিস্টরা ইউজ করতো বিবলিক্যাল টেক্সটস, বা ধরো ব্রাহ্মণরা কি করে আর কি অচ্ছুত জাতটাকে মেনটেন করতো বাই সেইং দ্যাট সংস্কৃত ভাষাতে লেখা এই ভগবদ গীতায় আছে যে তোমরা অচ্ছুত, আর তোমরা আমার ছায়াও ছুতে পারবে না, মন্দিরের ছায়াও ছুতে পারবে না। অ্যাকচুয়ালি ভগবদ গীতাতে ওটা লেখা নেই। দ্যাট ইজ হাউ দ্য প্রিস্টস অর দ্য ব্রাহ্মণস ইন্টারপ্রেটেড দ্য টেক্সট, so that they can maintain that casteist society in which India used to live in a few decades ago, and ekhono kichu kichu grame hoye thake. Okay, so this is ensures social order and cohesion. To this we may add a still more telling observation, not of the internal function of native religion, but of the impact of European culture upon the Indians. Most things they saw with us, Harriet writes, ei Harriet take ami bolchi, just let me finish this paragraph first. Most things they saw with us, Harriet writes, as mathematical instruments, sea compasses, the virtue of the lodestone in drawing iron, মানে ইস্ত্রি করা, মানে একটা বড় দেখে ভারী পাথর দিয়ে আর কি তখন ইস্ত্রি বানানো হয়েছিল। সো জামা কাপড় ওটা দিয়ে ক্রিজ চলে যাচ্ছে, দ্যাট ওয়াজ ইটসেলফ আ স্পেকটেকল ফর দি আনএডুকেটেড সো কল্ড স্যাভেজ ইন্ডিয়ান্স। এখানে কিন্তু ইন্ডিয়ান্সের কথা বলা হচ্ছে। দ্যাট ইজ ওয়াই আই এম টিচিং ইউ দিস এসে। Most things they saw with us as mathematical instruments, sea compasses, the virtue of the lodestone in drawing iron, a perspective glass whereby was showed many strange sights. Perspective glass mane kaleidoscope, okay, today's kaleidoscope. Burning glasses, wildfire works, guns, books, writing and reading, spring clocks that seemed to go off of themselves, and many other things that we had were so strange unto them and so far exceeded, this is important, so far exceeded their capacities to comprehend the reason and means how they should be made and done, that they thought they were rather the works of gods than of men. Mane all these instruments, they surprised the native Indians so that the native Indians thought that these instruments were the works of gods rather than men, or at the least wise they had been given and taught us of the gods. The effect of this delusion, born of the vast technological superiority of the European, is that the savages began to doubt that they possessed the truth of God and religion, and to suspect that such truth was rather to be had from us, whom God so specially loved, than from a people that were so simple as they found themselves to be in comparison to us. এখানে কিন্তু quotation mark আছে, এই যে was rather to be had from us, this Harriet is writing in his book. Now first information, who is Thomas Harriot? Thomas Harriot was an early 17th century, early Elizabethan, more properly saying, early Elizabethan explorer and historian. He was not a traveler. একটা travelogue কিন্তু খুব different হয় than a history book or an or a book of exploration, a book of voyages. Traveler observations গুলো খুব different হয়. But he was a historian, a British imperial officer who was an historian, a mathematician who invented the binocle, who had a hand in the discovery of the telescope. Okay, he was a renowned mathematician, uh, astronomer, and he was an inventor. He was a scientist who was also an explorer, and who came to India very early, and that gave him an advantage of presenting India for the very first time through his book, which is still read today as Greenblatt reads it, even though to challenge what the book says. And Harriet was known to be a very orthodox Catholic. Okay, so এখানে ওই জন্য এত mention of God, এত mention of religion. So what you see in this essay, Greenblatt traces the origin of this subversion, origin of this domination. কি করে প্রথমে ধর্ম ব্যবহার করে নেটিভ ইন্ডিয়ানসদেরকে চাপিয়ে রাখা হয়। ধর্ম আর টেকনোলজি, religion and science, the so very contradictory ideas. It were these same contradictory ideas that the British used to coerce us, to forcibly dominate us. We have the technology, which the natives, being comparatively uneducated or less scientific কিন্তু না, নেটিভসদের কাছেও কিন্তু মানে হয়তো ওরা মেটালের জায়গায় wood use করছে, but they were not as polished as an European instrument. Okay, so the natives do not possess these means, and these people do. The natives think that the gods must favor the imperials or the white people more, so that they have these instruments and we do not. And so Harriet says, whom God so specially loved, that is the British officers, than from a people that were so simple, that is the natives, as they found themselves to be in comparison of us. Greenblatt says, then what we have here, I suggest, is the very core of the Machiavellian anthropology that posited the origin of religion in a cunning imposition of socially coercive doctrines by an educated and sophisticated lawgiver upon a savage people. The origin of the use of religion to coerce, এটাই এই এসেটাতে ট্রেস করছে। I hope up till now it's clear. কোনো প্রবলেম থাকলে ডেফিনেটলি বলবে, ঠিক আছে? If you want me to repeat or clarify anything more, better আর কি, just stop me, unmute yourself and ask. Okay, so this is the book that Thomas Harriot had written in Brief and True Report. India, Brief and True Report, the name is also very significant, Brief and True Report. However, the tribe's stories begin to collapse in the minds of their traditional guardians, and the coercive power of the European beliefs begins to show itself almost at once in the Indians' behavior. How? On a time, মানে বলছে যে এখন the coercive power of the Europeans' belief begins to show itself almost at once in the Indians' behavior. Now the Indians, they are accumulating and internalizing this difference, this so-called difference or inferiority, a internalizing of the otherized, মানে বলেছিলাম এটা, মানে the otherization, becoming of the other is an internalized concept, whereas ওই যে splitটা occur করছে, the split occurs in the mind of the other subject, that who are you. তো প্রথম ধাপটা কিন্তু acceptance of the dominating ideology, the acceptance of the imperial or the colonizers ideology. The second step is challenging of that ideology. So this is the first step that we see. Harriot writes in his book, on a time also when their corn began to wither by reason of a drought which happened extraordinarily, fearing that it had come to pass by reason, that in something they had displeased us, many would come to us and desire us to pray to our God of England, that he would preserve their corn, promising that it was ripe. We also should be partakers of the fruit. Mane the natives, when they lost their cultivated corn, they came to the Europeans and begged and asked them to call their gods, because the natives' own gods, they are not answering the call of the natives. মানে চাষ নষ্ট হয়ে যাচ্ছে. So as a result, they are going to this scientifically superior people and saying that maybe your gods will favor us, and if you help us, then we will also give you a share of our cultivated crop. Now, what is the politics of this? Greenblatt says, if we remember that, like virtually all 16th century Europeans in the New World, the English resisted provisioning themselves and were, in consequence, entirely dependent upon the Indians for food, we may grasp the central importance for the colonists of this dawning Indian fear of the Christian God. So the fear of the Christian God was necessary. As Machiavelli understood, physical compulsion is essential but never sufficient. The survival of the rulers depend upon a supplement of coercive belief. This is what ISA is. RSA diye physical compulsion you will get, but with the ideological state apparatus you will get your rule supplemented by coercive belief, by the working of ideologies. So this fear of the Indian fear of Christian God was a necessary information, necessary observation that Harriet wrote down. Writing down টা খুব important, because এটা as a historical document এখনো present. Wrote down, he observed the Indian fear of the Christian God, and he wrote down in his book and circulated this information that the Indian natives, they were afraid of us, and they came to us to pray to our God and told us that they would give us a share of their crop. So it is not because we did not have food. They did not have food. এখানে যে দেখছো যে they resisted provisioning themselves. They did not have food for themselves. So they were inevitably dependent upon the natives' food. But this information of the Indian fear of Christian God was necessary, so that the idea that the imperial colonizers are superior always remains represented and always continues to be circulated. This is the politics of representation, যেটা আর কি Said also talks about. Okay. It is only an agent of the English, it is only as an agent of English colony. এই যে নাও এতক্ষণ যেটা পড়লাম, এই যে হ্যারিয়েট কি করে এত, মানে তোমরা জিজ্ঞেস করতেই পারো, you may just ask that how come Harriet has so much of power, that he has this condition of he has this opportunity of changing the course of history the way he saw it. Just give me one moment. হ্যাঁ স্যার বলুন। গুগল ফর্মটা হ্যাঁ স্যার করে দিচ্ছি স্যার, একটু পিজির ক্লাস নিচ্ছি, আমাকে আর একটুখানি সময় দিন, আমি করে নেব, ঠিক আছে? ওকে স্যার, হ্যাঁ। Okay, I'm sorry. Let's begin. Yes. So how come Harriet as an individual has so much power? Now this is the answer. তোমরা জিজ্ঞেস করতেই পারো, Rudyard Kipling being one single author has so much of power that he creates an entire representative ideology of the Indians. It's possible. Greenblatt, being the very good critic that he is, he writes that it is only as an agent of the English colony, dependent upon its purposes and committed to its survival, that Harriet is in a position to disclose the power of human achievements. Reading, writing, gunpowder, and the like, to appear to the ignorant as divine, and hence to promote belief and compel obedience. Now this is the politics of it, that Rudyard Kipling is not an author only by himself. ও নিজের ইচ্ছে, বললাম না, he was not a traveler like Hoan Sang. He was not a traveler like him. He was an agent of the British imperial কি বলবো, imperial project, that colonizing project that was so much craving for its survival. And Harriet was also like that. He was an agent of the same colonizing institution, and that institution gave him the power, the authority to commit to acts that perpetuated the colonizers' belief. They brought in guns, they brought in gunpowder, they brought in religion, they brought in science, they brought in magnifying glasses, binoculars, telescopes, and showed it to the so called savage Indians, that made them or put them on the pedestal, making them god-like superior. God-like superior. So, this was the politics, or this is how Kipling, also as a representative of the imperial colony, perpetuated or used his text to continue this otherized representation of the Indians. Thus, Greenblatt says the subversiveness, which is genuine and radical, sufficiently disturbing so that to be suspected of such beliefs could lead to imprisonment and torture, is at the same time contained by power it would appear to threaten. Indeed, the subversiveness is the very product of that power and furthers its ends. Mane? Even here in this essay, if the Indians start fearing the Christian God, fear equals what? Fear is equated with escapism. If you fear something, you run away from it. That is the general opinion. So if the Indians are afraid of the Catholic gods, they will run away from their belief. So the project of colonialism, which started as a religious project of converting as many Indians to Christianity as possible, ওই project will fail if the Indians stop believing or stop wanting to believe in the Christian God, in the religion of Christianity. So what Harriet does, Harriet as a representative of the colonial power twists the observation. He says that it was as if they thought that belief in our gods could return life to their crops, and that is why they promised us a share in their crop. Politics of language, Edward Said bolche na, that linguistic politics. Post-colonialism is nothing but the discourse analysis of the imperial language that they used, that they immortalized through their books. So this is how he twists the observation, and this is what Greenblatt said. This is why Greenblatt says that even though subversion existed as a form of fear, it was contained, it was controlled by the imperialist project. I hope you have understood. So even though, if you are applying this to Kim, even though Kim is an Indian who sees India through his own eyes, he is constantly told to be an English officer's son, he is constantly told to be an imperial officer's son, he is constantly told to be a white man. আমরা কিছুক্ষণ পরে দেখবো that there is a quote in the text that where we see that even though Kim was burned black, he was white. So even the color of my flesh is not sufficient to give me an identity. The identity is always provided by the colonizer. Greenblatt says we can deepen our understanding of this apparent paradox if we consider second mode of subversion and its containment in Harriet's account. Alongside the testing of a subversive interpretation, তোমরা এটা একটু নিজেরা পড়ো, just give me 1 second. Yes. Alongside the testing of a subversive interpretation of the dominant culture, we find the recording of alien voices, or more precisely, alien interpretation. Mane, up till now, we saw how Thomas Harriot or Kipling tests the subversions by containing them. Contains the subversion. ওটাকেই তো টেস্টিং বলে। টেস্টিং মানেও তো এক রকমের কন্ট্রোল। These are all synonyms of the same idea propagated. So alongside the testing, alongside the containment of subversive forces of the dominant culture, we find the recording of alien voices. Alien voices মানে কিছুই না, alien to the British imperial colonizers কি হবে? The Indians, the natives, of course, they will be the alien ones. So the recording of alien voices. The occasion for this recording is another consequence of the English presence in the New World. Not in case the threatened extinction of the tribal religion, but the threatened extinction of the tribe. Now this is where this essay gets the most interesting. Recording মানে নিজের লেখার মধ্যে he is not only writing about the apparent subversion which he politicized and contained, he is also recording, or he is also including the voices of the other as well, recording the voice of the other as well, of the natives as well. And he describes an event. There was no town where we had any subtle device practice against us. There was no village or no tribal community that was not obedient to the colonizers. Harriot writes. Now this is his observation completely. But that within a few days after our departure from every such town, the people began to die very fast. And many in short space. In some towns about 20, in some 40, in some 60, and in one 60, which in truth was very many in respect of their numbers. The disease was so strange that they neither knew what it was nor how to cure it. The like, by report of the oldest man in the country, never happened before, time out of mind. So this is a disease that he is talking about. Harriot is writing, of course, about the effects of measles, smallpox, এটাই হচ্ছিল, or perhaps simply the common cold upon people with no resistance to them. But a conception of the biological basis of epidemic disease lies far, far in the future. Of course, এখনো অবধি disease and its control সেটা অনেক পরে হবে, তখনও হয়নি। It has not yet happened in the 16th and the 17th century. Medicine progress তখনও এত অবধি হয়নি। For the English, the deaths must be a moral phenomenon. The notion is for them as irresistible as the notion of germs for ourselves, and hence the facts as they are observed are already moralized. The deaths only occurred where they used some practice against us. That is, where the Indians conspired secretly against the English. And with the wonderful self-validating circularity that characterizes virtually all powerful constructions of reality, the evidence for these secret conspiracies is precisely the deaths of Indians. So what is he saying? If there is a death in an Indian village, history is constructed backwards. So if Harriot is a historian and he observes deaths, Indian deaths, the conclusion he arrives at is that they are dying because they practiced against us. That is, they attacked or challenged our authority. This is how the wonderful circularity of power construction works. It works backwards. প্রথমের event থেকে lastটা should have been the conclusion that what are we doing to them? Why are they attacking us, challenging our authority? Why are they dying? So if I put aside the notion of a disease, যেটা এখনো তৈরি কনসেপ্টটা নেই এখন অবধি, then the only conclusion that they can arrive at is a moral conclusion, that is, they are dying precisely because they acted against us or refused our own authority. And then he says in his own book that those that were immediately to come after us, the first English colonists, because Harriet was an explorer. ও প্রথমে দেখতে এসছে, ওই examiner of land, like Kafka was in in the castle, তাই তো? Kafka's castle. Yes, Kafka was a land examiner, and so was Harriet, and he was followed by the English colonists who came to India and settled over here. So those that were immediately to come after us, they imagined to be in the air, yet invisible and without bodies, that they by our entreaty and for the love of us did make the people to die by shooting invisible bullets into them. Many those people who came after them, after Harriet, they came to the conclusion that it is only for the love of the English community that the Indian natives are dying, and we are shooting invisible bullets unto them, that we are not even applying any force of the gun, but it is only the ideology, the false consciousness that we have created in their own mind, in the natives' minds, that they are inferior scientifically, they are inferior in the religious sphere, that they ought to die in front of the superior. This is the invisible bullet, the ideology of colonialism, the ideology of the colonizers, or the ideology of imperialism. In the very moment that the moral conception is busily authorizing itself, it registers the possibility, the inevitability of its own destruction. And this is where post-colonialism comes into question. The idea of challenging, the idea of interpellation, the idea of answering back to the ideology, that in the very moment that power constructs its truth, it also lays the foundation for its own destruction. How does it happen? This destruction begins with the process of the recording of the alien voices. Because Greenblatt asks that why should power ever record other voices, which violates it, which disagrees with it? The answer may be in part that power, even in a colonial situation, is not perfectly monolithic, and hence may encounter and record in one of its functions materials that can threaten another of its functions. In part that power thrives on vigilance, and human beings are vigilant if they sense a threat. In part that power defines itself in relation to such threats, or simply to that which is not identical with it. So the fact that Kipling describes the Indian bazaars as he observes them, describes the Indian the ghats, the Ganga ghats that he describes in his novel, because it is a function of power to be vigilant, as Greenblatt puts it, to watch over all the time, everywhere. It is a part of its function. Vigilant থাকতেই হবে। Power, ক্ষমতার one of the functions of power is to be vigilant. And so is Kipling, who is a representative of the colonial imperial power. He observes everything like a god, like an overseering, overpowering god, and he describes them in his novel. But in the same time, which is of course an advantage, which Greenblatt says it's our own vantage point, that we can see through these descriptions the subtle challenges, the subtle subversiveness that exists within the observed description, that we as scholars, or we as critics of imperialism, may expose them to the readers as writers, which Kipling as a writer did not, because his political function was completely different to what would be our political function. Power vigilant থাকে because it is his function, because it is a function. Power vigilant থাকে also because it senses a threat in what it observes. But then you might ask, then what happens in the in a democratic function? তাহলে এটা কি করে হয়? Democratic function where everyone can see everything. If power chooses not to show you a particular video clip of a particular village which is ruled by the Indian army, তোমায় দেখাতে চায় না, but there will always be a subversive element. ওই পার্টিকুলার ভিলেজেরই কেউ একটা ক্যামেরা অন করে রেকর্ড করে তোমাকে পাঠিয়ে দিল, তোমাকে স্প্রেড করে দিল. So what is hidden by the power is shown to you by the subversive elements, and it lies upon you to decide how power contains subversion, how the containment inevitably fails. The recording of alien voices, their preservation in Harriet's text is part of the process whereby Indian culture is constituted as a culture and thus brought into the light for study, discipline, correction, transformation. The momentary sense of instability or plenitude, the existence of other voices, is produced by the power that ultimately denies the possibility of plenitude. মানে কি বলে বোঝাচ্ছে এখানে? This is another theoretical concept called, I am writing it down, dialogism. এটা হলো এই থিওরি, এইটা propounded, this concept was propounded by হোমি ভাভা. হোমি ভাভা বলে একজন ব্যক্তি ছিল যে লিখছে ডায়ালজিজমের ব্যাপারে. মানে if you read novels, he's talking about novels, he says that if you are reading novels, you will find that there are dialogues, conversations in the novels. Mane Kim is talking in the novel Kim, there is a dialogue of Kim, there is a dialogue from a native, there is a dialogue from a beetle seller, there is a dialogue from the llama. There is a character in the novel. So a novel is inclusive of all of these dialogues. Now from all of these dialogues you get all of the perspectives that exist within a social construct. Language is not without history, barbar bolchi, language is not without history, not without tradition, not without traces of imposition, traces of domination, traces of culture. আমি কি বলছি, কি utter করছি, that is that is a part of my identification. So in the way that novels incorporate or are inclusive of all of these dialogues, it provides a space for subversion, it provides a space for using power's own ways to turn against it. And this is why this recording of alien voices work to our favor as critics of colonialism, so that we could challenge them. আর এই জন্যই বলছে এটা তোমার পোস্ট কলোনিয়াল থিওরির সাথে ইউ ক্যান অ্যাপ্লাই ইট টু ওই যে অ্যাম্বিভ্যালেন্স, মানে বলছে না, দি object is objectified at the point of gaze, the point of time, the moment where the Occident looks at the Orient in an inferior nature. The Orient also at that moment questions the superiority of the Occident. The white colonizer sees the native sees the white colonizer at the same point of time. The colonizer is aware that that the native is inferior to him, but also at the same time aware that he has taught the native to become like him. Civilize করার চেষ্টা করেছে তো, attempt তো করেছে. She is aware that he is somewhat like himself and yet not like me. The native is also aware that he poses himself to be a superior, but look at me, I am almost the same. So এই যে দুটো ডায়ালগকে কন্টেইন করা হচ্ছে, recording of the other voices, this itself is a threat to power. The very construct that decided to include the dialogues. Kipling might have thought, or Kipling may have thought, that including the dialogues of the natives in the very way they speak may add to the propagation of colonial ideas. But we, as post-colonial critics, we do just the opposite. We use the natives' dialogues as a challenge to the constructs made by Kipling, the author himself. Is it clear? কারোর কোনো প্রবলেম থাকলে প্লিজ বলো. I don't think I have anything else from this essay. Oh, okay, there is just one part. Okay. Power that relies upon a massive police apparatus. আজকের দিনের কথা ভাবো. Massive police apparatus. A strong middle class nuclear family like our modern society is. an elaborate school system that we have powered the dreams of a panopticon. Panopticon mane watching everything, centralized power. Centralized power মানে কেন তোমার মনে হয় দিল্লি is a city where we have the রাষ্ট্রপতি ভবন, where we have the parliament, because it is the central position of this entire country, from which they are equidistant from all the margins of the country, from the boundaries of the country. They are the panopticon, that is, they can visualize everything that is happening around them, like a prison system, যেখানে একটা central building থাকে that overlooks over all the other buildings where inmates are contained. So power the dreams of a panopticon in which the most intimate secrets are open to the view of an invisible authority. Such power will have its appropriate aesthetic form in the realist novel, which Kipling's Kim is also is. Realistic novel একটা third person narrator থাকে, he, she, it এরকম ভাবে কথা বলা হয়, আর সেই কারণেই we as readers, we are exposed to all the forms of dialogue that exists within that novel, and we as post-colonial critics are at the most superior position to understand what power is trying to do, to understand how we can subvert this power. Okay, I wanted to talk some more about the representation of the natives. I still have time. It is a 40 minutes documentary, so it's 12:13. Okay, let me, so I still have some time, right? Okay, so let me just finish what I was. Yes, so coming back to where we are, how the natives are represented. Let's see, we just read how the representation of the natives are used as a political force to continue the subversion, how the representation of the natives can also be used by us, the post-colonial critics, to challenge authority. So let's apply this knowledge to Kim. Okay, as an Anglo-Indian, Kipling is more likely to act the role of propagandist for British India. যেটা বলছিলাম, he is a representative of the British imperial force. Kipling's Kim is among his works that deal with the theme of empire. It is about the protagonist's journey. Kim, who is an orphan of an Irish sahib from Lahore to Benares. The journey witnesses plenty of Orientalist representations. Indeed, native Indians are degraded, endorsing the British Anglo-Indian superiority. Being Anglo-Indian, Kim's superiority is alluded to from the first page of the novel, with the emphasis on his skin color. Though he was burned black as any native, though he spoke the vernacular by preference, Kim was white, Kim was English. His white skin is the first sign that he is born to be superior. Thus, it is his innate duty to civilize and enlighten the non-white. For instance, when Kim says, ask him, the Lama, he's asking the Lama, ask him, he will tell thee I was sent to him from the stars. He emphasizes the notion of the divine mission, which was also the divine mission of Kipling's race of the white imperial officers, to enlighten, to civilize. Now, আমি just narrate করে যাচ্ছি, so if you have any problem I'm saying again and again, just stop me in middle, আমি mute করে প্রশ্ন করবে, ঠিক আছে? Kipling makes it clear that the natives are inferior to the British in all spheres. At the beginning of the novel, native boys are characterized as subordinate to Kim. He kicked Lala Dinanath's son. I am quoting, আমি কিছু কিছু জায়গায় quotes use করছি, I think you will understand. Quote, he kicked Lala Dinanath's son off the Trunians since the English held the Punjab and Kim was English. Quote close. Even as a child, he unconsciously celebrates his superiority as a white. And he is constantly laughing at the natives' boys, like when they are afraid of, quote, strange priests, unquote. He laughs at them, saying, quote, run to your mother's laps and be safe, quote close. The mockery does not stop at the level of children. In chapter 2, quoting a northern proverb, a soldier tells Kim, let thy hair grow long and talk Punjabi. That is all that makes a Sikh. That is to say, a Sikh or any other native ethnic group in India is nothing more than a physical appearance. A native is a native. They are all pinned down to the same status of subordination. Though those Sikhs, according to history, are loyal followers of the British rule. So even the loyal followers of British rule fall under this circle of politicizing of representation, of politicizing identity, of wiping out any heterogeneous identity. Shobai ek. Homogeneity. Power always wants homogeneity. Differences China. It wants to wipe out difference. It is easier to control a mass of people if there are no differences, if everyone is unanimously obedient to the British rule. Furthermore, Kim unconsciously gets aware of the Orientalist notion, us, quote unquote, that goes in hand with its opposite other. How comes it that this man is one of us? Kim wonders how a native other takes part with the British in the great game. Since Kim thinks himself to be English and white, he wonders how come a native other is a part of the imperial force. Chilo imperial forces er jonno Indians used to work. You have seen in many movies. Those natives that are unpredictable and complex. As Bennett says, Bennett is a character, Bennett says, one can never fathom the Oriental mind, with no notion of time, since, again quote, all hours of 24 are alike to Orientals, quote close. So there is no difference between the Oriental mind. And the phrase and this dialogue that he says that one can never know the Oriental mind, this is also something of the British propaganda. Heart of Darkness, the novel that you know about, Joseph Conrad's, the very title of the novel itself stands for this dialogue, that one can never know the Oriental mind. So Africa is the Oriental mind, and it is full of darkness, the heart of which is to be pierced by the imperial forces. যেটা জানা নেই সেটা জানতে হবে। জানা নেই মানে কি? No knowledge has been formed. So the first person who reaches that empty dark space creates the knowledge. Knowledge that is represented, circulated, immortalized, and then eventually challenged by post-colonial critics, which we are also trying to do here. Kim also recognizes that one must never forget that one is a Sahib, etc., etc. He says, for this very reason, to emphasize the natives' inferiority, the author changes the spelling of words like opinion, efficient, right, religion in Babus, in the speeches of the Babus, so as to demonstrate the inferiority and incapability of those speakers to learn English, since it is superior to their capacities. Kipling uses all the means to say that they cannot be a part of us. So there is, up to now, is it clear? Does anyone have anything to ask? You must ask now. ঠিক আছে, so I'm assuming that you have that there are no doubts. There are other things additional things that I have to say with regard to the representation of natives in the novel Kim. But since I said that I will show you a documentary today, so we will keep it till here, and we will move on to the documentary. Just one moment. Yes, but before watching the documentary, please keep these things in mind. You have to pay very close attention to the pictures and the snapshots within the video, কারণ আমরা representationের কথা বলছি. Representation is not always and only textual, it is visual, it is cultural, it is ideological, it is oral, মানে যেটা শুনতে পাই সেটাও representation. Okay, you have to, this entire documentary is a pastiche, it is a collage of film scenes, it is a collage of animation scenes, it is a collage of photographs, of victory photographs, of war photographs, of interviews by Saeed, etc. All of these things. So you have to pay very close attention to the pictures, the snapshots. You need to note down the his মানে Saeed's কথা বলছি, note down what he describes. পার্টিকুলার জায়গাগুলোতে যেখানে ও ডেসক্রাইব করছে, হি ইজ বিং ভেরি ডেসক্রিপটিভ ইন হিজ সেন্টেন্সেস. ইউ নিড টু বি অ্যাটেন্টিভ টুয়ার্ডস দ্য ভিডিও স্নিপেটস, মানে কিছু কিছু ভিডিও স্নিপেটস গোটা ভিডিওটার মধ্যে দেওয়া হয়েছে,